This feels a little bit like the Academy Awards. You get to come on stage and shake everybody's hand and so on. This is a session that's about policy pioneers, and I'm going to try and cover over the course of the next 45 minutes, I'm going to try and cover 4 major topics. One of them is around how to build things. What should we be building? Second is about social license, how to create it, how to hold it together, and so on. Third is we want to talk a little bit about the back end of the fuel cycle, nuclear waste, and so on. And then last, I want to ask each of the panelists at the end about what are they most proud of as pioneers, and how do we get the lessons from the pioneers followed more widely around the world. So that's, if you want to follow at home, that's the kind of rough architecture of today's discussion. We'll see whether the conversation actually follows that architecture. But I'm very much looking forward to this. And maybe I could start with you, Todd. Tell us a little bit about, seems like 20 years ago, everyone was talking about the nuclear renaissance. Then we kind of went through the Middle Ages, I guess. Now we're back at the Renaissance. Ontario has been in the middle of all this, both with existing reactors and then now planning to build new reactors. And I'm just curious, what's changed and why?
Yeah, it's a great question. This nuclear renaissance is a real one, by the way. We're seeing action, and I think that speaks to the fact that this renaissance is real, and the fact that at the giant COP28 conference that's going on here in Dubai, nuclear has really been put at the forefront as a way to battle climate change. I think the seriousness of fighting climate change has elevated the need for nuclear, and we hear folks who are maybe questioning nuclear's role previously are understanding the fact that you need baseload emissions-free power to reach the targets that countries around the world have set. And Ontario and Canada are a perfect example of how you can make nuclear work in your system, in your electricity grid. And as more and more young people are starting to realize as well, and they are 100% on board, it's probably the biggest issue that they're facing in their lives, many of them, is what do we do about climate change? The realization exists that nuclear is the path to net zero, just because it can provide so many gigawatts in a small chunk of land, and it's there 24/7, 365 days a year. It's energy that you can depend on. It's emissions-free energy that you can depend on. And I believe that's why, a big reason why this renaissance is a real one, because it's going to help solve the climate crisis.
So just one quick follow-up on this, though, and we'll come back to the 100%. 100% is a big number, so we'll come back to the younger generation and their support. But I just want to press a little bit on what changed. Was everyone just kind of sitting around saying, hey, let's go do nuclear? Was there a big shift in policy? Or what is it that turned us from the Middle Ages, I guess, back to the new Renaissance, and your confidence that this Renaissance is actually the real deal?
Yeah, I think we have learned in Ontario by moving very, very quickly on renewable projects with feed-in tariffs that drove up the price of electricity in our jurisdiction, while at the same time making very, very little difference when it came to emissions, that we needed to go to a baseload power source. Now, this was a previous government that made those decisions to pay excessive amounts, far over market price, for renewables that are only there when the wind's blowing and the sun is shining. So there's a realization there that you can't just do it with renewables. Obviously, they play a very, very important role going forward, and they play an important role in our diverse grid in Ontario. We get about 60% of our electricity every day from our nuclear fleet, and then 25% from our hydroelectric fleet. Wind and solar make up, depending on the day, 6 or 8%, and we're balancing right now during the peaks with natural gas, and we have a natural gas.
So the discussion we had earlier today about reliability and cost, that figured in very prominently. So I want to bring, Nikolay, I want to bring you in on this conversation. Bulgaria has 50 years of experience with nuclear power, a lot of Russian reactors. Now you've made decisions in the last few months about an AP1000. Tell us, what's the policy pioneer? What's the innovation that happened that made it possible to do this, set up this arrangement to build the AP1000?
Well, first of all, as you quite rightly said, Bulgaria does have an experience with nuclear operating nuclear power plant for, yes, about 50 years. It's true as well that so far it has been, the experience is only with Russian reactors, Russian technology. And it is about time for Bulgaria to invest into new units, which the decision has been already taken. And as we consider the technology development over the last few years, we have to say that in the last decade, we have to say that there is a great development of the technologies and of the nuclear technologies particularly, and therefore we are, at the end of the day, we have chosen the AP1000 as the technology for these two new reactors which the state is investing in. Now this is something which, as our colleague is saying in Canada, we cannot rely for the future without sustainable and solid energy. I mean, base load capacity such as the nuclear, because we in Bulgaria we do have some coal. We are phasing out coal, but in order to replace this coal with something clean, carbon-free, then obviously we are only bound to renewables. We say that I completely agree that they cannot be base load. Unfortunately, they are a great tool for the future for our kids, but still, I mean, we know we need reliability for the system, and therefore we decided to invest in two new units. AP1000, and as we speak now, we are starting the negotiations for the EPC contract.
Just a quick follow-up on this. There's been a lot of Russian misbehavior in Europe in the last couple of years. I'm curious, does that position, which Russia has dominated the nuclear reactor export business, the project that's going on here is one of the few non-Russian export projects in the world, and in that case, Korean project, which we learned about earlier. Korean design, Emirati built and operated, extraordinary project. Do you sense that Bulgaria and other countries that you're talking with are going to accelerate their move to building projects like the AP1000 because of the Russian behavior?
Yeah, to a certain extent. But I mean, we have, as I said, we have in Bulgaria, we have considered the development of different technologies. And obviously the behavior of Russia in the last almost 2 years is only pushing the decision in that way, if you want. However, having said that, I mean, the initial the basis for our decision is we needed and we're looking for a well-developed and a solid decision for technology, for nuclear technology.
Based on the fundamentals, even before what's happened with Russia. I want to shift now and bring Katie into the conversation. The United States has adopted all kinds of legislation. We're back. We're building things. I think for people sitting on the outside, it's hard to make sense of all the different moving parts. There's a lot of money sloshing around and a lot of complicated programs. Help us understand, from your vantage point sitting in the Department of Energy, what's most important in terms of these new incentives for keeping open reactors and building new reactors?
Thank you for that. I assure you that from within the United States government, it is also somewhat confusing to keep track of all of the initiatives that we've been able to pass. This legislative action through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act. We've been able to execute a number of these activities through tax credits, whether it's investment tax credits or production tax credits that are being rolled out to encourage subsequent license renewals for existing plants. Of course, we have a massive fleet in the United States, the largest in the world, and one of the easiest ways to continue to make progress towards our climate goals is to not let them shut down. And seeing some tax credits inspire our existing fleet to commit to subsequent license renewals has been really encouraging about the impact of those tax credits and their promise on the utilities, but we want to see more. And so in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there was the Civil Nuclear Credit Program intended to help struggling plants. There was also dedication to the public-private partnerships under the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program that includes the X-Energy reactor and the TerraPower Natrium reactor. These, of course, are accompanied by work in my office around reducing risk for a variety of other reactor companies. Pretty much every reactor company under the sun is represented by funding, direct funding through public-private partnerships from my office or the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. And additionally, and I think perhaps most importantly, there's $250 billion worth of loan programs authority for cheap, low-cost capital available to new nuclear projects. Under that loan program's office authority, we really expect to see a lot more new builds and activities, whether it's for reactors or components of the supply chain. You know, we would love to see applications for manufacturing capabilities to produce nuclear components that will support the supply chain necessary. And you can get loan programs office loans for all kinds of endeavors, including those. So, you know, these laws that have been passed are historic in nature. It's billions and billions and billions of dollars. And the Department of Energy is executing an enormous amount of it alongside folks across the interagency. You know, State Department of Commerce, you know, the IRS, everyone has a role to play, but it's a real complicated grouping, but it includes all kinds of things such as hydrogen hubs, you know, billions of dollars towards real consumer producer pairings for production and consumption of hydrogen in regions across the US, 3 of which these hubs are nuclear. So it's a really exciting time, and it's all enabled by those tax credits. And I will say, you know, from policy driver perspective, you know, you mentioned Russia, and misbehavior is an understatement. I think ultimately in the United States, we also see energy security as a critical component to the bipartisanship for nuclear power, and the Russian behavior, totally unacceptable invasion of Ukraine, has spurred a lot more attention on that in our Congress.
Let me, I want to come back at the end if we have time and talk a little more about how this relates to other national priorities like friendshoring and onshoring and so on. I know a lot of people are concerned about that. Just very quickly though, before I go on to Johan, help us understand, you've got programs that are good for big reactors, that are good for small reactors. We had a talk earlier today about XM, and there's a big effort to promote U.S. technology overseas, including small modular reactors. Do you have a sense, Katie, of whether this is mostly going to be a story about the big reactors with a few small modular reactors going to sprinkle like sprinkles on ice cream? Or is the small modular reactor story going to be a big deal as this unfolds?
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be a combination of a variety of different sizes. We're going to have locations in the United States that are more natural fits for gigawatt scale deployment, perhaps because of the shape of the grid in that vicinity, or the shape of the need. Perhaps data centers, for example, are going to drive a lot of need for 24/7 reliable electric power that's clean. But small modular reactors are uniquely suited to fit into those locations across the United States where we have a ton of coal plants that are destined to retire. And those retiring or retired coal plants are in the hundreds of megawatts in size, and they're located in the grid in places where the grid needs that reliable power in the many hundreds of megawatts, not necessarily in the gigawatt scale. And to leverage those high voltage power lines, to support a transition for those communities in those locations, and to therefore reduce the cost of the deployment of SMRs, I think we see an opportunity that's 250 gigawatts worth of SMRs potentially over the 80% of those locations that are suitable for nuclear power.
I want to bring you in, Johan. One of the reasons I was so excited that you'd be on this panel is that you and your organization have been in the middle of a renaissance, not only in potentially building reactors, but also in public support. Your country, Denmark, I think maybe 10 years ago, the fraction of the population that was supportive of nuclear power was close to 0. Now it seems like a really different story, and can help us understand what's turned it around. What should everyone in this panel be watching in terms of these rapid shifts in public support favoring nuclear power?
If we take Denmark as an example, of course, as you say, we have experienced a land shift in the support towards nuclear energy in the last only 8 years. And what will happen is like, when we go out to the world and we have talked to a lot of people here at COP, Denmark is brought up as like this lead example of how to deploy wind energy, of course, with the land of the wind turbine and Vestas and Ørsted. But lately we have seen that the renewable energy sector is also struggling and some financing problem, also deployment problems. And in Denmark, we are still reliant on coal and biomass to either do heating or electricity. And the population is starting to realize, and the young people are starting to realize, that wind and solar is not just enough. Because biomass, as we all know, because of the Kyoto Protocol from 1997, if you import it into a land and you then burn it, it is the country that the tree is cut down in, that the CO2 emission will be put on. And we do that in Denmark. 35% of all of our energy, not electricity, but energy in Denmark, is from biomass. And we can we have 50% of penetration rate of wind in our electricity sector. But electricity is such a small portion of our energy. Only 20% is electrified in Denmark. So these realities, young people especially, are being made aware of this. And they see that we are not the green leader. And making them aware of it in our organization, going to elementary schools, going to high schools, going to universities and doing lectures for hundreds and thousands of young Danish people, teaching them about climate change, teaching them about the green transition, and also teaching them how nuclear, together with wind and solar, can play a part also in a country as Denmark, because we need to decarbonize the whole energy sector. And we haven't even done it with electricity. That's the easy part, as we see now. Now we need the 80%, the heating, the industries, the transportation. We haven't even got there yet. Mm-hmm. So taking Denmark as a leading country, I would be a little bit more skeptical if I was you the next time. And we're seeing that. We have a majority now in the population that are pro-nuclear. We were only at 16% pro-nuclear in 2016. It's now a little over 50. That's a tripling of the support to nuclear energy in Denmark in the last 8 years. We went from 66% anti-nuclear in 2016 to only 32 now. So people are realizing. But we are in the same situation as Australia is. As Ted O'Brien said earlier, like, they have a ban on nuclear. We do as well in Denmark. And we have nuclear developing companies in Denmark that are leaving the country because they can't test their reactors. So what we're working with politicians and leaders in Denmark to change this perspective. And it's happening. We are nearly seeing a majority of Danish parties being pro-nuclear. And if it can happen in Denmark, if Denmark can tip to become pro-nuclear, it can happen everywhere. Because Denmark is one of the most anti-nuclear countries. It's a part of our national identity.
And we had heard about this about Austria as well earlier, also part of the national identity in Austria. Let me just very brief follow-up, and then I want to come back on this issue of social license, the other panelists. Everyone else in this panel is talking about building new reactors. Everyone today has been talking about building new reactors. We've just heard huge announcements. As someone who's been working with lots of communities, what is it that worries you about all this talk about building new reactors? Is there some mistake that keeps getting made when people say, you know, I'm going to build a new reactor? What do they need to recognize about how to hold together social license?
Professionally, I work for a company in Denmark called Kernful Energy, and it's actually based in Sweden, and we have a sister company called Kernful Next. And the model they use, as well as other companies in Norway now, and also in Finland before, is not to have a top-down perspective on building new nuclear. It's a bottom-up, starting with the community, starting with the citizen associations, starting with the mayors, getting the municipalities to actually some kind of fight each other for where you have to have a nuclear power plant. We're seeing that in Norway now, and also Sweden, also with the waste depositories in Finland and also Sweden. You have several municipalities, they want to have these industries at their municipality. So by asking and by talking to people, making opinion polls, going to the street, going to the public hearings, and talking with the people instead of just coming and saying, we want to build a nuclear power plant here. Because as we also heard from Bill Macwood earlier, we were at a workshop earlier today, the youth advocates here at the COP28 and also Net Zero Nuclear. What was very clear there, we don't have a technology problem. We have a deployment problem. We have an implementation problem with nuclear. And that starts from a bottom to top perspective.
Okay, and one of the things I've heard in many of these discussions about siting is that this process takes longer, but it creates more durable projects, and I think that's been a working hypothesis. Now we're starting to see evidence that the hypothesis holds. Just quickly, I want to bring in some other voices about social license. Maybe I can go to you, Nikolay, first. Tell us about the state of public opinion in Bulgaria in terms of support for nuclear power. Is it really robust, or are there things that concern you about it?
It is, fortunately for Bulgaria, we do have a public perception which is supporting the nuclear power plants as such. Maybe this is because of the history, maybe because, as I said, we have a record of 50 years of safely running in the past 6 units, now 2, but still, I mean, that's the track record is perfect, and generally the population in Bulgaria does support that. In the same time, I mean, I'm taking the words of Johan. I mean, municipality of Bulgaria, where the nuclear power plant is located, is actually very happy. The population of the municipality is happy. So we were probably 30 years back, there was a second site being identified for a second power plant, nuclear power plant, and as it didn't happen, and now in our new energy strategy, we believe that it should be used, but after 2040, when the existing units are coming towards the end of their life, and we have to replace them. And then we will use that side. But my word was for the municipality then, but the people around and the whole region there was very disappointed of the fact that this new power plant was not going to happen in that region. This is just to give you an impression of how important the people in the local communities see these issues. And the construction of, last but not least, the construction of a nuclear power plant takes what? Good 10 years, maybe even more. About 10, 15,000 people working there, which is a great thing for the region.
Let me ask you, Todd, we're talking now about social license to operate and to build, not just to operate existing plants, but build new ones. As a political leader, it's hard to kind of get our heads around what does social license look like. If social license were walking down the street and said, "Hi, I'm social license, I'd like to talk with you." What do you see as most important, and how durable is this new social license to go for nuclear?
It's really important to have willing host communities, I believe, as a policymaker. And we're doing that in Ontario with all of our energy projects, working with proponents in advance, in communities, to make sure there is that buy-in. It's easy, or easier, in the operating communities right now, and we have 3 of them in Ontario. Bruce Power, obviously, the largest nuclear operator in the world, at about 6,550 megawatts coming out of that facility every day, and there's enormous buy-in in that community for the facility for a lot of reasons. It's providing emissions-free power, but it's also employing a great number of people who live and work in that community. And it's also providing tremendous economic development opportunities and growth in that community in other sectors, aside from just the production of energy. In Ontario power generation territory, east of Toronto in the Durham region, we call it the clean energy capital of the world. We have the 2 facilities.
I think there are a lot of people in the room who also have clean energy capitals of the world. So
well, they may, but the Durham region
title.
actually is.
Okay.
Listen, we have a long history much the same as my friend next to me has been saying, about 50 years of safe, reliable production of electricity from those sites. And the other thing that I think is probably most important from a policymaker's perspective is how much is this going to cost us? And one of the great stories that we've been able to tell, particularly in Ontario of late, is the fact that we're bringing in multi-billion-dollar projects, not just on time, but in some cases 6 months ahead of schedule, both at Bruce Nuclear and at OPG, where they're refurbishing these reactors and bringing them back ahead of schedule, and most important, and music to a policymaker's ears, on budget. And so that speaks to the quality of the people that are planning for the refurbishment projects. It also speaks to the talent of the skilled trades that are involved in doing the refurbishment work. And it also allows us in Ontario to embark on the next frontier, and that is small modular reactors. And congratulations to Raphael, who is just up here. He's one of the project partners on the GE Hitachi BWRX 300, and announcing that there are now, 24 potential
I'd heard you were going to announce 25 in Ontario today.
Well, we're building 4 in Ontario right now, and of course we're going to have the first SMR online in the G7 in late 28, early 29, and that is the GE Hitachi BWRX 300. So all of those things lining up, the social license, the great project management, and then being able to embark on the next frontier is really important.
Before I go to Katie, just one quick follow-up. Politicians' instinct. As a couple of these small modular reactors are built more or less on time, more or less on budget, is it your sense that's going to be transformative in the industry because it's going to create models that can be followed, or is it still not so clear what's going to happen?
Yeah, we're looking at it very much as an economic development opportunity. In Ontario, it's another job creation opportunity. We have a very robust supply chain for nuclear, given the CANDU facilities that we have across Ontario now, and there's about 76,000 people that work in Canada's nuclear sector, and that includes operators and supply chain. But this is going to allow us to export the SMR and the components from our jurisdiction to other jurisdictions, while at the same time working with those who are building these SMRs in their country or state, an opportunity to set up a supply chain there and see some economic benefits as well. So for us, it very much is an economic driver in a jurisdiction in Ontario that's actually seeing enormous growth right now in other areas like electric vehicles and EV battery manufacturing.
We need someone to supply that load. I want to ask you Katie, 2 questions about political support. First one's about building new things, and then we'll talk about nuclear waste after that. Traditionally, the left, not just in American politics, but the left in German politics, the left in Danish politics, the left maybe everywhere on the planet, was not thrilled about nuclear power. The Biden administration is an amalgam of political interests that are kind of from the center to the far left. How's it going in terms of holding the far left on board with a program that is building not just wind and solar and efficiency, but also nuclear?
Yeah, I think it's critical to note that, like, while perhaps the far left, as you described, driven by environmental concerns, that in the long history, in the long arc of nuclear history, of concerned folks around the context of nuclear, we're in a space where it's very bipartisan simply because of the threat of climate change. And I would say it's not just about left or right, it's also about old and young, it's about women and men, it's about professional and non-professional, it's about income levels. Different surveys are also going to really dramatically impact, different perpendicular parts of this equation. And I think we see that durable support you mentioned is an issue of intergenerational equity for most people, and for folks in my parents' generation, the existential threat looming was the existential threat of the atomic weapon. And for folks in my generation, it is the unquestionable existential threat of the climate crisis. And I think we're seeing that unquestionably we have social license to solve the climate crisis. In the far left of our party, in the middle left of our party, in the whole youth movement, I think you'll see there's a great deal of interest here, not just at COP, but across the United States. And some groups in this set of, orthogonal parameters are going to see climate as more or less important, energy security as more or less important, the turning on the lights is more or less important, or the cost of their electric bill is more or less important. And I think across the board, nuclear is winning on most fronts. Whether folks consider it extremely important or only a little important, nuclear wins in most of these areas for most people these days.
I want to pivot and talk about spent fuel waste. When we talk about being policy pioneers, the theme of this panel here, and especially given all the attention to tripling nuclear power that's happened here at the COP, it's extraordinary. We tend to focus on building new things, which is great. But part of the overall license is also having a vision for the back end. So maybe I can start with you, Katie. Say a couple words about what we've learned from other countries about how to do this, because the United States has had a vision for a long time, going back to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, not 1882, so at least we've made some progress, but 1982, of having a repository and that being the strategy. That's failed basically completely. And so I'm just curious as to, when you look at other countries, what are the countries that are the models and what are you learning from them?
Yeah, we in the Department of Energy over the last couple of years have executed MOUs with some of the countries we admire the most in this context. I'll especially note NWMO, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization in Canada, is doing a great job, identifying their final repository through a consent-based approach. Finland, of course, is the example to hold up against all others in terms of finding a location for their repository, and my team on the nuclear waste side is learning daily from them through these MOUs. Also, we learn from ourselves. As you noted, it failed pretty dramatically, this approach that did not start with consent, that drove toward Yucca Mountain. Under that Nuclear Waste Policy Act, I'll note that in 1998, it was the United States federal government's responsibility to take title to all of the fuel in the U.S. and begin, taking care of it and owning it. We were supposed to take title of that fuel in 1998. As many of you know, I was 12 years old in 1998.
We're not going to hold you personally responsible. I think once you're 14, then you're actually responsible for the nation's waste.
I think this is very much a canonical example of an intergenerational equity issue. As sort of I mentioned before, the responsibility of one generation to the one that follows it is inherently tied in the way we approach the durability of this solution. And so we're trying to learn, and we've executed $26 million in grants to help communities in the United States better understand what interim storage would be, so that when we do take title to that fuel, we'll have a location volunteer for that. So we're starting at the bottom and starting over from there.
In just a couple minutes, I'm going to ask each of the panelists about the policy innovation or their pioneering that they're most proud of or most iconic. But I want to first bring Johan into this conversation. Earlier, you talked about bottom-up solutions, citing, engaging communities. Your organization's been active in Sweden. Sweden's another one of these countries that has done a pretty good job on the nuclear waste setting. So I'm just curious, you've heard Katie talk about what the United States is now going to do after trying something else that has not worked. What's your advice to her in terms of what has worked in your eyes?
I think the model of, again, getting the citizens more involved in the action, because as we see now, as you mentioned, Katie, you mentioned this intergenerational shift that will, when building nuclear, it's not a 25-year project, it's a 60 to 100-year project. And we need to realize that a lot of the people that are, in the sense, wanting to help mitigate climate change don't know anything about nuclear. We do not have enough education. We do not have enough role models, social media person, youth advocates out there teaching people about nuclear energy. It is still an industry topic. And we heard from one of my fellow volunteers, Paris from Stand Up From Nuclear, said earlier today that the industry and advocates has been so far apart in the past on the issue of nuclear. Actually, the industry has sometimes been stopping, in some sense, the advocates. So from what we're seeing here, we're 60 young nuclear advocates from over 20 different countries around the world that was brought here by Net Zero Nuclear from the World Nuclear Association and ENEC. What this shows is a new era where young advocates that are pushing this cause is actually talking with industry. That is what the renewable movement have done the last 10 years. So this is what we can learn from all countries. Get more involved with the young advocates. Get more involved with advocacy, because this is the way that you're going to win the population to do more nuclear.
Very specific advice, and you can start tonight. Tonight it means each of you from the industry take an advocate out to dinner. That's the way to get started. We just have about 9 minutes left. I want to ask each of you, maybe starting with you, Todd, very briefly, and I know we're in inflationary times, so one now means 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Tell us a bit really about the innovation, the policy innovation, pioneering innovation that you are most proud of or that you think is most iconic.
Sure. Obviously, we're very proud of our history when it comes to CANDO and the fact that we were able to export CANDO around the world, and the track record that we have with CANDO has allowed us to move on to the next generation of nuclear. But I think the thing that probably makes me proudest as an Ontarian right now and a Canadian is the fact that we did prepare a site and have it regulated by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission and the environmental assessments done years ago to put us in a position where I believe we are in the pole position to having the first small modular reactor producing electricity on grid, and that of course is the GE Hitachi BWRX 300, and it's enabled jurisdictions like Poland, who were just up here to talk about reducing emissions in their country, which desperately needs it. So I'm very proud of the team at Ontario Power Generation and Ontario's leadership on the world stage.
Okay. Nikolay, what is the innovation or policy innovation you're most proud of here?
Right. Probably what will be in the last year or so, there is probably the greatest achievement of us in Bulgaria as a government and parliament and societies. Probably that there is a wide support across the different parties, which are otherwise opponents, across the society. A wide support for this for the development of the new nuclear units and further keeping Bulgaria as a net exporter of electricity, which we have always been in the region, and keeping it for the future to be so. Probably that's the best achievement within and we have to use that pace and continue to do so.
Thanks. Katie?
In addition to tax credits and everything that I shared before about the administration's energy policy, I'll say in my office, the thing I'm most proud of is our university program, which has, for the last few decades, focused on research and development directed by universities that has resulted in things like NuScale, Kairos. I was supported as a student through research in this program. As a professor, I was supported through research dollars from this program. Practically every company in the United States and many companies elsewhere is supported through money given by this program to really explore innovative ideas and build up that capacity. And we dedicate, up to 20% of our budget to the maximum extent practicable, and sometimes it's less than 20% by a long shot, and it's always a sad thing when we can't quite hit that number, but I think it is the most important thing we do in my office.
I think the proudest thing about being policy pioneer in this sense is the movement that we have in Denmark have jumped ahead of a lot of the other environmental movements in Denmark. We're working with several different parties in parliament, politicians, doing their pledges on their climate and energy. And what we're seeing is that they're trusting us in a new way. We're actually bringing a solution to the table, because I think a lot of politicians and a lot of industry also starting to get tired of this problematization that are very broad in a lot of activists. They're only seeing the problem. There's no solution. And bringing nuclear into the mix, and with wind and solar, we see a lot more industry and politicians take us much more serious. And it ended up that we have now tipped 5 to 6 parties in the Danish parliament. This is unheard of in Denmark. So, and this is only a couple of young people with doing advocacy, being motivated by trying to solve climate change. People going to uni, people not even attending uni, people at 16 years old are on the street advocating for nuclear energy, standing up for 10 hours a day, solely volunteer-based, just to try to solve climate change. You don't see that in any other movement. So we're just proud of the impact that we're doing without any bigger organization behind us. And just through advocacy, you can change a lot.
The turnaround is truly extraordinary. Nikolay, did you want to follow up on something?
Yeah, I was just to say something where we started the panel. I mean, with your words about the Renaissance. It's very good. I mean, we're all here and we're speaking about the Renaissance, but we have to go further than that. And triple the declaration for triple the nuclear by 2050. That's a goal we are all aiming at. But I do believe personally that double it in the next decade is a must. This is what I do believe. Double it by in the next 10 years.
So as we wrap up here, I want to just say 5 things I took out of the panel discussion here. First is there's a lot of leadership. There's a lot of things that are happening about which people are proud. I think one of the things we often forget when we talk about leadership with global problems is that to solve global problems requires not just leadership, but also followership. And so we need to identify ways to take the 4 things that these folks are proud of, examples like Baraka, other iconic leadership examples, and make them understandable so that there can produce more followership. That's how we're going to actually deliver globally on tripling nuclear power. The second is, I think, it was a really interesting discussion we had about the social license. And nobody talked about this just as a public relations or a polling question. Everybody talked about it as an engagement question. I think that's really important. We need to be a little cautious that we don't get so thrilled about the new polling data that we forget that the reason that these projects are put together and held together, these are huge capital investments that have long durations, that have risk involved in them, is that they're anchored in engagement. The third of the 5 things I take from this panel is the opening comments from everybody, which were a story about the role of nuclear and reliability. So I recognize the earlier comments about the challenge of getting power markets to value capacity and so on. That is a work in progress at best. But people are beginning to figure this out, and that's a big part of the nuclear story. Fourth of the 5 things is that we're building things. We're now starting to really build things in lots of different places of the world. It's extraordinary. And the last thing I'll say is the role of this existential threat. 2 generations ago, the existential threat was nuclear war and concern about obliteration of the planet by that mechanism. That was bad news for nuclear power to some degree. Now this is existential threat about climate, and if Denmark can turn around from the situation that it was in 10 years ago to the situation it's in today, I don't think we're running out and building a lot of AP1000s just yet in Denmark, but maybe tomorrow. That's a sign of how quickly things can change as people rethink their priors in a world where you've got to get serious about making big reductions in emissions. So please join me in thanking this terrific panel.
Thank you.